about advocacy within our community. And so really we're just having that staying up to date on the 89th legislative session and how our board has been involved since even before the session started this year in getting ready for it. So this is our trustees. We have Stephanie Reynolds, who's our board president, who is on her way. Mary Jane Hetrick, who is our board vice president. Olivia Barnard, who's our board secretary. Kim Cousins, trustee. Janda DeLeon here, trustee. Ron McClellan, I just saw that there, trustee. And then Tricia Quintero. So our board is excited to be here and to share with you a little bit about the work that they have been doing. This is our advocacy subcommittee. So if you didn't know, because legislative priorities are so important in our district and because really getting to our legislators information about public education has been important, our board formed an advocacy subcommittee to help make sure that we were putting information together and sharing information more broadly about what's important for Dripping Springs ISD. So I'm going to hand it over to Olivia as our advocacy chair.
Good morning, everybody. As Holly said, we just entered our 89th legislative session. The state of Texas, of course, meets in Austin from January through May every other year. Fun fact, our last legislative session, the 88th, there was over 1,100 education bills brought to the legislation. So public education is always one of the largest components of legislation. In the 89th, of course, it started in January, runs to June 2nd. And in December of last year, our board signed off on our priorities for the legislative, and then we write that up, and then our task is to meet with, speak with our state representatives, but also share with community members what those priorities are. That was in December, and actually you can see those on our website if you just go to Board of Trustees and then legislative priorities. And Kim is going to discuss legislative advocacy.
Okay, so our subcommittee, we met and we decided what are we going to talk to legislators about, because they have a huge list of things that they're dealing with, and education is just a little tiny piece of that. So we didn't want to overwhelm them, so we came up with some specific areas to share with them. And it was important for us when we met with them to talk about the facts of Dripping Springs ISD, especially our representatives. They need to know, how much we're spending, what is our financial status of the district and how can they help us. So our committee got together and kind of established a few priorities. And the big thing is basic allotment. And basic allotment is how much money we get per student. There's two ways in the United States that they really provide funding for districts. One is based on average daily attendance, and another one is student enrollment. In the state of Texas, it's on average weighted daily attendance. So we get 6,160 in a basic allotment for a student, and that's only if they come to school every single day. If they don't come to school every day, that 6,160 just keeps dropping down to a much lower number. They haven't increased the basic allotment since 2019. And if you go back and you look at records, you can see a history of them about every 5 years doing a pretty significant bump and increase in the student allotment. So we really need that money here, and we're fighting to get that increased as a board. We thought that was very important. Additional funding for state mandates, we're going to get into that and kind of let you know where we're spending money and what we're getting on safety, security, special ed, dyslexia, and reading academies. And we want to also be able to decide how we're going to spend the funds that we get. A lot of times lawmakers are up there making decisions and they're like, okay, districts, you have to go and do A, B, C, and D. And then we're going to tell you, and we're going to give you some money, but we're also going to tell you how to spend it. So we're going to talk a little bit about local control, but we would like to have a little bit more flexibility in how we're spreading the wealth of students in our district.
Kim did such a great job highlighting basic allotment. That is our #1 priority for this board, and I think really for the state. We're seeing it in districts across the state because, as Kim said, since 2019. So imagine your household budget. You're still operating your household expenses based on the same household budget that you had 6 years ago now. With inflation, it just doesn't work. So our top priority is the basic allotment, because that is our primary mechanism used to fund Texas public schools, specifically our maintenance and operations budget, the budget that keeps the lights on, keeps teacher salaries paid, keeps our administration, our paraprofessionals, everyone from custodial up to your PhDs in the district. That student allotment has to cover all of your maintenance and operational expenses. Obviously, we discussed hasn't increased since 2019. And in the 88th legislative session, there was about $4 billion that ended up not going back to public school because our legislatures did not come to agreement. So the good news is, I think it's a higher priority for them this session to come to an agreement, but it's important if you're gonna go out and advocate to understand if no decisions are made, that money literally does not come back into education. It just stays with the state. Public school receives funding based on, as Kim said, the number of students in the ADA, the average daily attendance. Those of you who have kids in the district, you've noticed this year we put together a much more organized effort to make sure that we're communicating with parents how important attendance is. Number one is just for the linear educational experience. If kids are not in the classroom, they're missing out on that education and they can miss essential learning days. But the other side of that, like Kim says, if you take a classroom with 22 kids and your expectation is that you're gonna get 6160 per child, we have to build the buildings and the classrooms and have the seat for every single child. We have to pay the staffing to make sure that we have those classrooms covered for. But we actually start losing if our daily attendance rate goes down. So every family vacation, every sick day, I need a 3-day weekend Monday actually does affect. So we did the math one time and we figured out last year, I think I came to about our actual per student allotment after you take our ADA was under $6,000 a year. So that 6160 assumes literally a 100% attendance. One thing that we did talk to both of our legislators about, our committee met with both of our state reps and we talked about, would you consider being an advocate for changing your daily allotment calculation from ADA to total enrollment? And they weren't keen on the idea because the thought process, if you go to enrollment, then the district is no longer encouraging high attendance from your community. So we think really just education, parent engagement is the #1 way to handle that. So now we are going to go to unfunded mandates.
Oh, my favorite topic. When we sat down, like I said, we came up with 3 areas on unfunded mandates to show them actual facts about Dripping Springs ISD. So we picked safety and security, special ed, dyslexia, and reading academies. We're going to take a look at any funding provided to the ISD doesn't match the expenditure requirements to meet the mandates, and we're going to show you some slides. Let's talk about safety and security. And then you've got a comparison. We just went all the way back to 2019 to kind of tell you what that looks like, but going to 24-25, the state gives us $203,080. We are spending $1,111,073. And that's what it takes to fund the safety and security requirements that we have to do in Dripping Springs ISD. Your armed presence on campus is $613,000. You've got required technology and physical hardening. So when you break some of those numbers down, that's kind of where they're going into. So the state says you're going to have safety and security. You're going to hire armed people. We're going to give you a little bit of money to do that. You can't hire somebody for $15,000 and $20,000. It's going to take $75,000 or a decent salary to recruit and get quality people in here. When you're talking safety and security of students, you really do want the best in your buildings. Another area that we took a look at, special education allotment and expenditures. There are a lot of requirements in teaching a special education student, and the state realizes that, so they give you some extra money. So you can look at, they give us actually about $8 million, and we're spending 14, because these are all of the things that we have to do to provide for these students, and they know There's also a shortage statewide of funding high-quality special education teachers because of the responsibility of what those teachers are required to do. And in Dripping Springs, we're going to make sure those kids have what they need to be successful, especially this population of our students. And the last section was going to be, well, that's on our dyslexia expenditures, so you can look at that, getting $571,000, spending $1,082,000. And then we get to reading academies, which are things that we are required to do. Is there a slide on the reading? No. Okay. On reading academies, we're spending well over what it's required to train those teachers to assess those reading skills at a very, very early level. So they're giving us little tiny pieces of money and making all those decisions, and we're having to spend this much to meet the needs of these students, and it's just not balancing out.
If I can just point out, when we talk about the basic allotment being 6160, that's assuming a tier 1 student, so no special programming. When you see numbers that we're getting back from the state for other buckets, if you will, like safety and security, like dyslexia, the district receives additional funding for gifted and talented programming, bilingual programming, and those are students that are not tier 1. So as the state collects, or as the districts collect property tax revenue, and those big buckets go up to the state, what they let us keep is the $61.60 per student for maintenance and operations, and then every other dollar that comes through different programming comes back from the state, if you will. And now Tricia is going to talk about one of our favorites, local control.
Local control. All of this kind of falls under the purview of local control because of the basic allotment. That's actually the allotment given to us per student. But there's programs every legislative session that chips away at our control over where we can spend and utilize our funds. So local control, you can't really pinpoint a specific bill or a specific conversation to local control, but I can tell you one of the most recent is the Blue Bonnet curriculum that has come out. And it's tied to funding per student. So the board looks at that, we're in a bind, we're in a financial bind right now, and they kind of dangle a carrot in front of school districts to utilize these programs that aren't necessarily a one-size-fits-all. Maybe it's not good for Dripping Springs ISD. And so it kind of takes and undermines what you guys are electing us to do, which is make the financial decisions for the district. So supports giving local districts and boards authority to determine curriculum programming and how to allocate the funds it receives beyond the standard state and or federal funding, allowing DSISD to meet the specific needs within our student population, which we heavily rely on our administration and our staff to give us the information about our particular students every day, really.
Some of our other legislative priorities, I need my readers here. Like we said, you can find this document on our website. If anyone's going to go meet with legislators, this might be something nice to have with you. But obviously, education funding is number one. And I just want to expand. Any of you who's been to Taxpayer Tuesday has heard me talk about this. We do not have a good relationship between taxpayers and public education in Texas because the ISD line item on your tax bill is so huge. Most of us pay in about 70% of our property tax bill to education. So taxpayers are looking at that going, why in the world am I getting another email asking to donate paper to my kid's class? Why don't they have paper? Why are we short on educators? Because the perception is we're raking in $200 million a year here locally. So we are also advocating for transparency in taxation because the money that does not stay local, how many have heard of Robin Hood? Okay, most of us. When most of us in the room were growing up, Robin Hood was created, which later became recapture, now known as recapture. I can't imagine that there's anyone that doesn't agree that every single child in Texas deserves opportunities, access to free quality education. And that's what Robin Hood was initially designed to do. If you have a district that has robust property tax levy, and then you have an area that doesn't, say there's no commercial industry, you don't have high real estate values, this district over here, those students would not be getting potentially the same opportunities. So Robin Hood was created to say there's a per student allotment per child. Some districts that have higher tax revenue, that's gonna be shared. Unfortunately, what has happened since then is at that point in time, those dollars were tracked and they had to stay per student in the state. What's happened now is after we collect our $100 million a year in tax levy, we get to keep our 6160. Everything else goes into state. And there's no legislation that confirms that those dollars stay in education. As you can see, many do, because we get them back through different programming. So anyway, tax transparency is also part of that conversation. Local control is going to be a big one. The education savings account and charters. As trustees, each of us are able, of course, to have our own personal opinions. But when we make a decision as a board as to what our legislative priority is as it came to vouchers, the decision was this. We want to encourage our state legislatures to ensure that any money that goes into private school or homeschool, that there are standards and accountability. Public school has to provide transportation. We have to provide meals. There are high standards of accountability, as we talked about tying every dollar of funding to different measures. And it would be unfair that tax dollars that are going to fund private and homeschool, that there would be no accountability. So our message to the legislatures were, if something passes through vouchers, that there should also be accountability for those. Teacher retention and staffing shortages, we all know that this is something that is a challenge throughout the state. We are advocating for additional state funding for educator and staff compensation. Of course, we have heard our governor talk about that in the last few days, that that's a priority. But also the rising cost of health insurance, which impacts our district. The teacher retirement savings system and substantial financial aid and other programs and incentives for prospective teachers. In the last 10 years, I'll try to keep this short, but in the last 10 or 20 years, the disparity between private sector pay and public sector pay just continues getting broader and broader and broader. And we have to start looking at public education. If you're going to hire and recruit the best talent, the people that we want spending 20, 30 hours a week with our kiddos, we have to be able to be competitive, not only in pay, but also in benefits and retirement. And then accountability, just supporting the establishment of a fair, transparent, and comprehensive accountability system that looks beyond the high stakes, multiple choice exams to meaningful assessments that have value for students, parents, teachers, and community stakeholders. With advance notice of implementation, does anyone in the room know why that last sentence is so important? Why?
Because they changed the rules after they already put it out.
That's exactly right. So much of what we do, whether it's funding or grades that we get, and the grades that we get impact who and how many people want to move to the area and the perception of your district. What we have experienced just in my tenure on the board is you're moving along, you're doing great, you're meeting all the measurements, and then literally change of the rules and change of the grading scale. So what we're asking the legislatures to do is, if there's going to be changes in accountability, that there is actually advance notice and implementation of those changes, so that boards and districts can change the metrics on how to get there. Thank you for listening to our TED Talk.
Teacher retention and staff shortages. It's just getting harder and harder to recruit teachers, and our district's doing a great job. We have 0 vacancies, which most districts cannot say. But we're up there. When we go downtown to Austin, we're fighting for getting more money for these teachers. I mean, their salaries compared to the work they're doing, it's just not meshing. Is this where there you go? Okay. We want to support funding for keeping up with inflation. Most of our teachers in the district, they don't even live in Dripping Springs ISD. Many of them cannot afford to do so, and those that do, their rent is really high. I don't know if a lot of y'all are aware, but Bama Brown on his property built some houses for teachers, firefighters, and police officers to have a more affordable place to live. These are 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom houses. The rent's like $1,900 a month. The electric bill's like $40 a month. So there's people in our community that are trying to help with getting these teachers places to live. And we would like to see that be all across the board and have the state help us fund that. And that's on the housing allotments, but the cost of living. You know, we're trying to give teachers a raise every single year, but it's getting harder and harder and harder to be able to do that. But we want to pay them to keep up with the cost of living, and it's getting tougher and tougher every year. Some districts are giving, you know, up to 2 and 3% raises. We're at least doing a 1%. 1% is better than no percent, but we would like to give, you know, 3 to 5% if we could, because we value their time and what they do.
Accountability. So everybody knows about the STAR testing. A lot of people have different mixed feelings about it. It's necessary for the state to be able to hold districts accountable because obviously we want our kiddos to be learning, and we want the state to know that Dripping Springs ISD is doing our part to ensure that all of our kiddos are the brightest and the best, which is what we strive for. The STAR test, it's a little broken, in my opinion. We've had workshops about it, and the accountability system that we currently have in place causes our kiddos anxiety. It's kind of trick questions. It is teachers that actually put the STAR test together. They have a group of teachers that are chosen to ensure that the questions kind of follow suit with what our kiddos should be learning. But it's just not, it's not really very good. And I don't know, in my tenure of public education, it's changed over the years to be different tests, and we still haven't gotten that right. So our board supports the establishment of fair, transparent, and comprehensive accountability system that looks beyond high stakes, multiple choice exams to meaningful assessments that have value for students, parents, teachers, and community stakeholders with the advance notice of implementation, which is super important. Our district actually does MAP testing, which is really good because it's individualized per student, and so I'm hoping to see something come out of the legislature this time that follows suit with that.
Would be awesome. I'll keep recapture short because I went off on that tangent a moment ago, but just to give you a bullet point, chapter 49 of the Texas Education Code is where you will find that. And really all we're asking for is that if tax is going to be collected under the line item of ISD, that it stays within education rather than going to a state surplus, which we've seen in the last several sessions. So how can you get involved? One thing, Taxpayer Tuesday, it's one of my favorite things to do. But we see, I love you guys, but we see the same people. So we've got to somehow reach a broader audience. But our state legislatures, if you're in this room, you probably live in either House District 73 or House District 45. So you may have either Carrie Isaac or Erin Zweiner as your state rep. However, both of these ladies cover the district, so I would say always reach out to both if it's education related, in my opinion. Easy to find their contact information. And then also Senator Dawn Campbell and Congressman.
Donna Campbell is actually on the Education Senate Committee too, so she's really a good resource to utilize if you have any questions or concerns.
And you can go down there any given day. Just get your car and drive down there and check in, and you can go and you can start knocking on doors. How do I know? I've done it. We're going to actually be down there next week, but you can either schedule an appointment and they will see you at, when they're available, or you can just get down there and knock on doors, take our priorities with you, share your thoughts, share your ideas, but we gave you the facts about our district and kind of how our board feels, and get down there and start knocking on the doors. It's kind of entertaining.
And everything's online. You can also watch all of their Senate committees, and everything is available online. I got to experience the entire Senate Financial Committee meeting yesterday. I just listened to it in the background while I was working. And it was interesting to hear all of the complaints that I hear all of the time that we all have, and they're discussing them every day. So that's also an option to go online and watch.
Yep. The domino that knocks everything down, that solves not all of the other problems, but man, if that student allotment is brought to just the inflationary value, it helps us in every other way of the other priorities that we shared.
And it allows us to have local control.
Thank you, guys.